In this video, we will see why it is so important to learn to organize your work by grouping objects together and even using layers. When you have a complex design, like this one, what you can see here, it will be made up of lots of separate little objects. When I'm on my layers panel and I scroll down, you can see exactly how many shapes and objects were necessary to create this design. It is useful to get into the habit of grouping objects together while you are working, and even think about a layer structure which can help you to separate elements in your design. Having a good structure will make it much more easier to make amends and alterations in the future. It becomes increasingly important to learn this way of working when you start working professionally, because you will have to share your working file with other designers or your client. And in case it's a big mess, like this here on the right, it's going to be a big problem. So first of all, let me just zoom closer and maybe start with something very simple, like this camera here. At the moment, as you can see, each element is a separate object, so I can't really select them all together. If I try to make a selection on them, what happens is I start moving that rectangle or square in the background. First of all, we have to lock that. We already learned that in the previous video that we can use the shortcut Control or Command 2 or come to the Object Lock Selection option as long as it's selected. We can even see that here in the Layers panel. If I scroll down all the way at the bottom, I will be able to see that object. While we are working in this document, I'm going to just double click on the Appearance panel. So we have a little bit longer list of objects. So now let's try to do the same thing again. Make a selection of this part here, and then to turn this into a group, we can press Command G or Control G on PC. That will turn it into a group. Now here on the top, I can see it's already a group. And if I click on this little magnifying glass at the bottom of the Layers panel, that will find that object within the Layers panel. So it highlights it and tells me that that's the group now, and it holds all these objects inside. If I want, I can even name this object, and I can call it camera, just like that, which will make it also easier in the future to identify it from the Layers panel. So let's use the same technique on this compass. I'm going to make a selection of all those elements, press Command G or Control G, and that should turn it into a group. Now we can find it here in the Layers panel, and I can click on it, rename to compass. I can keep doing the same thing, selecting all these elements, group them together, and you don't even have to name them at this point. You can always come back and name them later. So I'm just going to group a few of these elements here in this top left corner, and I will make a selection of the plane as well. It's important to select all the parts of the plane, so I might actually use the lasso tool and make a selection that will definitely include all the elements necessary. Then switch back to the black arrow and press Command or Control G to group it together. So now that's also one element that I can easily select at any point. The sun is another one, and so on and so forth. Now let's try to do something different. I am going to select all these lines, the dashed lines, and I will hold down the Shift key and click on them one by one. Luckily, they are not split into small items. They are actually compound parts, so it's quite easy to select them. And once I have all of them selected, I can cut them out and place them on a separate layer. So that's what I'm going to do. I go to Edit, Cut, which will remove them from here. And instead of just simply grouping them, I'm going to create a separate layer. Now you see, I can close this first layer that we have, and all the way at the bottom of the Layers panel we have a new icon called Create New Layer, and with that I can create layer number 2. Once that's selected, I can go up to the Edit menu and choose Paste in Front. Now that's very important, not just simply paste, but paste in front will remember the position of these items, but now they are all on a separate layer. So if I call this one Directions, and I turn it on and off, the visibility of this layer, by clicking on the eye icon, we can see exactly what I have on that layer. While on layer 1, we have all the rest of the elements. So why is it better to separate certain things onto separate layers than just to simply group them together? Well, to be honest, I didn't want to group these lines together into one element, because then it would be difficult to select them individually. So having them on a separate layer allows me to lock the whole layer underneath, which means I won't be able to make selections of anything else, just these lines. So I can very quickly select them, move them around, and adjust them the way I want to. The same way, I could unlock layer number 1 and also unlock all that I have on the current layer, which means I can now select the background element, that big square, which again we can cut out from that layer and create another layer which we can call background, just to have a name on it. And remember, edit, paste in front, or you can remember Command or Control F is the shortcut to paste it back where it was. Now the only problem is that this layer, the background layer, is currently on top of our design. So that's what we need to resolve by just simply dragging it under layer number 1. So now I can always lock the whole background layer very quickly, and I can freely make changes to all the other elements. We can call layer number 1 travel icons, and then maybe what I want to separate from them is the globe. So what I will do is lock directions as well, and I will try to make a selection of the globe. So I will use the lasso tool and try to make a selection around the globe. I don't actually have to be so precise, but I'm trying to make this selection well. And the only problem I've done is I selected a bit of that plus sign. But once I switch to the selection tool, the black arrow, I can always shift click on that element so it's removed from my selection. Now it's only keeping the globe selected. So I can click on new layer, let's call it globe, and I'm going to cut this out and paste it on that current layer. I will use Command F or Control F on PC, and you will see that it remembers its position, but now it's on a separate layer. So having these items on separate layers makes it so much easier to find them and also to make changes to them. So now if I lock the globe layer as well, now I will only be able to select the items on this layer. So like the plane, and then I can select this item, I can group it as well. I would be able to continue doing the same thing, grouping all the remaining elements here. But now I don't even have to worry about these lines because we already logged them. So it's much faster and easier to make selections of the items that we wish to easily select and move around. Now, one other very important feature in Illustrator is called isolation mode. And that's something that you might also need to use a lot once you have complex illustrations like this. Let's just say we want to work on the plane, but we want to make changes only to that. It's already a group, which is great, but if I double click on it, it enters isolation mode, which means now everything else is grayed out and I can just really focus on working with the plane. Although it is a group, when I'm in isolation mode, I can select individual parts of it one by one, and I can even delete the parts that I don't need. So if I want, I can very quickly select the left wing and just simply delete it by pressing backspace. Or if I want, I can hold down Shift key, select the other wing, and just move the whole thing further back. Let me undo this and show you another example. By double clicking anywhere outside, we can exit isolation mode, and we can double click on another object to enter isolation mode again, but this time we are editing the compass. So zooming a little bit closer to it, I can select this again by using shift clicking those elements that I wish to change, and switching to the rotate tool, I can just start rotating this to the other direction. So that was quick and easy thanks to the group that we created earlier, but also thanks to the isolation mode. The way you can tell that you are in isolation mode is not only by seeing everything grayed out a bit in the background, but also by this bar here on the top, which tells you exactly which group you are currently editing. So if I double click anywhere outside or click on this arrow here, I can go back all the way to the original design, so completely exiting the isolation mode. And one last important technique is arranging objects. Let's just say these two groups I have next to each other, but I would like to have the compass behind the camera. To be able to do that, I can either right click and choose Arrange, Send to Back, which will move it behind it, and then when I deselect it, I can see now it's behind it. Or I can also use shortcuts. Notice that when I'm above the Arrange option, it tells me all the shortcuts necessary. To bring something front or back, you have to use Command or Control Shift square brackets. Or if you want to move things just one step in front or behind, that's going to be these two options. So bring forward, bring backward. Same shortcut, but without the Shift key. So let's try these out. Command Shift or Control Shift square brackets. I can move it very quickly in front or behind. Or I can also go into the Layers panel, find these objects. Maybe let's just move them all to the front, both of them, all the way to the top, and immediately they appeared here on top of the layer. Then if I select just the compass, I can also use the Layers panel to drag it up in front of the camera or below the camera. When you use the Layers panel, just be careful not to drag an item into another item, because that can easily happen if you hover over it and you don't wait until the line shows you where the new object is going to be placed. So if I let it go on top of another object, then they are actually combined or merged into the same group. Of course, you can also use the Layers panel to select objects. I could also select them, but instead of clicking on the names of the layers, remember to click on the circles next to it. These circles are the ways to make a selection of that current group or object, and holding down Shift again, clicking on the other circle, now will select both objects together. The techniques explained in this video will be extremely useful whenever you work in Illustrator, so I will have also an exercise to go through all these techniques at the end of this chapter. But there's one last thing that we need to talk about, and that is how to align and distribute objects.